I heard something bad about my daughter, didn't believe it, but decided to watch her. The words hit Richard like a physical blow. Not because his daughter was with a woman, he'd suspected that for years and didn't care who she loved as long as she was happy. What bothered him was the secrecy. The lies. Monica had always been able to talk to him about anything. They were a team, especially after her mother died when Monica was 15. Have you ever trusted someone completely, only to find out they were planning your downfall? Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family, enjoy the story. The richest man in Dallas stood in his daughter's empty bedroom, holding surveillance photos that would destroy everything he'd built. Monica wasn't just dating someone he disapproved of, she was conspiring with the woman who tried to bankrupt him 5 years ago. And the forged documents spread across her desk proved she'd been selling his company's secrets for months. What would you do if you discovered your only child was your greatest enemy? Have you ever trusted someone completely, only to find out they were planning your downfall? This is about the moment when unconditional love meets unforgivable betrayal. Stay with me to discover whether blood is truly thicker than money. Follow along as we uncover a family secret that's been eating away at $1 billion empire from the inside. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. Richard Hale owned half of Dallas, but he couldn't buy back his peace of mind after hearing 4 words: "Your daughter's been seen." The corner office on the 42nd floor had windows that stretched from floor to ceiling, giving Richard a view of the city he'd conquered brick by brick. Downtown Dallas spread out below him like a chessboard, and he'd been playing this game for 30 years without losing a single match. Until today. His assistant, Jennifer, stood by the mahogany desk with her tablet clutched against her chest like armor. She'd worked for him for 8 years and never looked nervous, not during hostile takeovers, not during SEC investigations, not even when that environmental group tried to shut down his largest development. But today, her hands were shaking. "Sir, you might want to sit down for this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Richard didn't sit. He never sat when bad news was coming. "Just say it, Jennifer. What's Monica done now?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Monica was his only child, 26 years old, and the heir to everything he'd built. She had her mother's green eyes and his stubborn streak, which usually made him proud. But lately, something had changed. The late-night phone calls, the mysterious trips, the way she avoided his questions about her personal life. Jennifer cleared her throat. "There have been reports about Monica meeting someone. Someone you know." "Everyone in this city knows someone I know." "Be specific." "Atlanta, sir. She's been driving to Atlanta 3 times a week for the past 2 months. Meeting the same woman every time. They're close." Richard's jaw tightened. Monica had never mentioned Atlanta. She'd told him she was taking art classes on those days, something about expanding her creative horizons. He'd even paid for the damn classes without questioning it, proud that his daughter wanted to explore her artistic side. "Define close," he said. Jennifer hesitated. "Intimate, sir. Hotel rooms. Extended stays." The words hit Richard like a physical blow. Not because his daughter was with a woman, he'd suspected that for years and didn't care who she loved as long as she was happy. What bothered him was the secrecy. The lies. Monica had always been able to talk to him about anything. They were a team, especially after her mother died when Monica was 15. "You have photos?" he asked. Jennifer slid a manila envelope across the desk. "The private investigator sent these this morning. I haven't looked at them, but he said you needed to see them immediately." Richard's hands didn't shake as he opened the envelope. They never shook, not even when he was buying his first property with borrowed money and a prayer. But inside his chest, something cold was spreading through his ribs like ice water. The first photo showed Monica getting out of her silver Bentley outside an upscale restaurant in Atlanta's Buckhead district. She was laughing, her head thrown back in that carefree way that always reminded him of her mother. The second photo showed her walking hand in hand with a tall black woman in an expensive burgundy dress. Richard's blood turned to concrete. He knew that face. He'd stared at it across a courtroom for 6 months 5 years ago. He'd watched it destroy 3 of his business partners and nearly cost him everything he'd built. Diane Crawford. The lawyer who'd represented the environmental groups trying to stop his biggest development project. The woman who'd called him a predator in a suit on national television. The woman who'd dug up every mistake he'd ever made and tried to use them to paint him as a villain. "Sir?" Jennifer's voice sounded like it was coming from underwater. "Are you all right?" Richard set the photos down carefully. His hands were steady, but his mind was racing. This couldn't be a coincidence. Diane Crawford didn't do coincidences. Everything she did was calculated, planned, executed with surgical precision. If she was with Monica, there was a reason. And that reason wouldn't be love. "Cancel my meetings for the rest of the day," he said. "And get me everything you can find on Diane Crawford's activities for the past year. Bank records, travel patterns, client list. Everything." "Sir, that might take some time." "Then start now." After Jennifer left, Richard stood alone in his office, staring at the photos scattered across his desk. The Atlanta skyline in the background looked peaceful, almost romantic. But Richard knew better. He'd learned long ago that the most beautiful scenes often hid the most dangerous traps. Have you ever had that gut feeling that someone you trust is hiding something? What did you do about it? Drop a comment below and let me know if you've been in a situation where your instincts were screaming at you but you didn't want to believe the truth. His phone buzzed with a text message. "Monica, working late tonight, Dad. Don't wait up. Love you." Richard stared at the message for a long time. 3 words that used to bring him comfort now felt like a knife twisting in his chest. "Love you." Did she? Or was that just another lie in what was starting to feel like a web of deceptions? The private investigator's first report arrived at midnight, target confirmed in Atlanta. "You're not going to like what I found." Monica Hale stepped out of the Bentley like she owned Atlanta, which was impossible, because her father owned her. The rain had been falling for hours, turning the streets into mirrors that reflected the neon signs and streetlights back up at the dark sky. Monica pulled her black coat tighter around her shoulders as she walked toward the entrance of Bones, one of Atlanta's most expensive restaurants. Her heels clicked against the wet pavement with the confidence of someone who'd never worried about money, never wondered if she belonged in spaces like this. But tonight was different. Tonight, every step felt like she was walking away from something instead of toward it. The restaurant's warm light spilled out through the windows, and Monica could see Diane already sitting at their usual table in the back corner, the one that gave them privacy from curious eyes. Even from across the room, Diane commanded attention. She wore power like other women wore perfume, subtle but impossible to ignore. Monica had been coming to Atlanta for 2 months now, and every time she saw Diane, her heart did something complicated in her chest. It wasn't just attraction, though that was certainly part of it. Diane made her feel seen in a way that had nothing to do with her last name or her trust fund. When Diane looked at her, Monica felt like she was looking at Monica the person, not Monica the heiress. The hostess led her to the table without being asked. Money had a way of making people remember you, especially when you tipped well and never caused trouble. "You're late," Diane said, but she was smiling. She had the kind of smile that made Monica forget about everything waiting for her back in Dallas. "Traffic," Monica lied, sliding into the seat across from her. The truth was she'd sat in her car for 20 minutes, working up the courage to come inside. These meetings were getting more complicated, and Monica wasn't sure she was ready for complicated. Diane reached across the table and touched Monica's hand. Her fingers were warm despite the cold restaurant air, and Monica felt that familiar electric shock that happened every time they touched. "You seem nervous," Diane said. "What's wrong?" Monica looked around the restaurant, checking to see if anyone was watching them. It was a habit she'd developed lately, this constant feeling of being observed. "I think my father might be getting suspicious. He's been asking more questions about my art classes." "What kind of questions?" "The kind that suggest he knows I'm lying." Diane's expression didn't change, but Monica caught something in her eyes, a flicker of something that might have been concern or might have been calculation. With Diane, it was often hard to tell the difference. "Richard Hale is a smart man," Diane said. "I'd be more worried if he wasn't asking questions." The way Diane said her father's name, clinical, detached, reminded Monica of something she'd been trying not to think about. Diane knew her father. Not just knew of him, the way most people in their circles did, but actually knew him. They had history. "You never talk about it," Monica said. "Your history with him." "There's nothing to talk about. It was business. Ancient history." But the way Diane's jaw tightened when she said it told Monica there was plenty to talk about. Diane had spent 6 months in court with Richard 5 years ago, and by all accounts, it had been brutal. Environmental groups versus big development, lawyers versus money, principles versus profit. Diane had lost, but she'd made Richard pay for every inch of ground he'd taken. Was it just business? Monica asked. Diane picked up her wine glass and took a slow sip. "What else would it be?" "I don't know. But sometimes when I mention him, you get this look in your eyes. Like you're remembering something that still hurts. Your father cost me a lot of money and a lot of clients. Of course it still hurts." Monica wanted to push further, but Diane's phone buzzed against the table. She glanced at it, and her expression shifted into something Monica had never seen before, excitement mixed with something that looked almost predatory. "Good news?" Monica asked. "You could say that." Diane slipped the phone back into her purse and leaned forward. "Monica, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." Monica's stomach clenched. "What? How much do you know about your father's business dealings?" "The real ones, not just the public face he shows the world." Monica faltered. The question felt loaded, dangerous. "I know he's successful. I know he's made enemies along the way." "Why?" "Because I care about you," Diane said, reaching for Monica's hand again. "And I want to make sure you're protected." "Protected from what?" "From the truth about who your father really is." The words hung between them like a challenge. Monica felt something cold settle in her stomach, but she couldn't tell if it was fear or excitement. All her life, people had talked about her father in hushed tones, respect mixed with fear, admiration tinged with caution. She'd grown up knowing he was powerful, but she'd never questioned what that power had cost. "What are you saying?" Monica asked. "I'm saying that Richard Hale didn't build his empire by playing fair. And I'm saying that sooner or later, that's going to catch up with him. When it does, I want you to be ready." Monica pulled her hand away. "Ready for what?" "To make a choice. Between the man who raised you and the truth about who he really is." "When did you first realize your parents didn't know who you really were?" Comment below if you've ever felt like you were living a double life, keeping secrets from the people who were supposed to know you best. Outside, Richard Hale sat in his black Mercedes, watching through the restaurant's window as his daughter leaned across the table toward the woman who had once tried to destroy everything he'd built. The rain on his windshield blurred the edges of the scene, but he could see enough. The way Monica's body language changed around Diane. The way she hung on every word. As Monica kissed Diane goodnight under the restaurant's awning, Richard's blood turned cold. He recognized that face from his worst nightmare. 5 years ago, Diane Crawford nearly destroyed Richard Hale in court. Now she was destroying him in bed with his daughter. The courtroom had been packed that Tuesday morning in September. Richard remembered it perfectly because it was the day his world had almost ended. Outside, protesters chanted slogans about environmental justice and corporate greed. Inside, Diane Crawford stood at the plaintiff's table like an avenging angel in a perfectly tailored black suit. She'd been beautiful then too, but in a different way. Professional, controlled, every word calculated for maximum impact. She'd spent weeks building her case against Richard's planned development of Riverside Park, 200 acres of wetlands that he'd legally purchased and intended to turn into luxury condos and shopping centers. "Mr. Hale, she'd said during cross-examination, her voice carrying across the courtroom like a sword cutting through silence. Would you agree that some things are more valuable than money? Richard had been testifying for 3 hours by then, defending every decision, every permit, every environmental impact study. His lawyer had prepared him for aggressive questioning, but there was something about Diane Crawford that made him feel exposed, like she could see through all his carefully constructed answers to the truth underneath. I believe in providing jobs and housing for families, Ms. Crawford. If that's what you mean by valuable. I mean pristine wetlands that serve as home to endangered species. I mean water systems that have existed for thousands of years. I mean leaving something beautiful for future generations instead of covering it with concrete. The way she'd said it, with such passion and conviction, had actually made Richard pause. For just a moment, sitting in that witness chair, he'd almost seen the project through her eyes. Almost understood why she was fighting so hard to stop him. But only for a moment. Progress requires sacrifice, Ms. Crawford. You can't create the future while clinging to the past. And you can't create anything lasting by destroying what's irreplaceable. That exchange had made headlines in the Dallas Morning News. Environmental lawyer challenges developers' ethics in heated court exchange. The article had painted Richard as a heartless capitalist and Diane as a noble crusader fighting for the planet. The truth, as always, had been more complicated. Richard had won the case eventually, but it had cost him 6 months of legal fees, millions in delayed construction, protesters outside his offices, death threats from environmental extremists. Diane Crawford had made sure the fight was as public and as damaging as possible. But worse than the money or the bad publicity had been the way she'd looked at him during the trial. Like he was something she'd scraped off her shoe. Like his success was evidence of everything wrong with the world. Now, sitting in his Mercedes outside the Atlanta restaurant, watching his daughter kiss the woman who'd once called him a corporate parasite, on live television, Richard felt that same cold fury he'd felt in the courtroom 5 years ago. This couldn't be a coincidence. Diane Crawford didn't do anything without a reason, and she especially didn't seduce the daughters of men she tried to destroy in court. This was calculated. This was revenge. But revenge for what? Richard had won the case. He'd built his development. The Riverside Park luxury community was now one of the most successful residential projects in the state, home to over 3,000 families. He'd proven her wrong about everything. Unless... Richard pulled out his phone and dialed his head of security. Marcus, I need you to pull everything we have on the Crawford versus Hale case from 5 years ago. Every document, every witness statement, every piece of evidence. Sir, that case is closed. We won. Just do it. And Marcus? I need it tonight. After ending the call, Richard sat in the darkness of his car, watching Monica and Diane through the restaurant window. They were holding hands across the table now, leaning in close like lovers sharing secrets. But Richard knew better. Diane Crawford didn't share secrets, she collected them. Have you ever wondered if your past enemies were planning revenge through your family? Drop a comment if you've ever felt like someone from your past was coming back to hurt you through the people you love most. The case files arrived at Richard's house at 2 a.m. Marcus brought them personally, 3 boxes of documents that represented 6 months of legal warfare. Richard had thought he'd never need to look at these papers again, but now he spread them across his dining room table like a detective trying to solve a cold case. The environmental impact studies, the witness testimonies, the financial projections, it was all there. But as Richard read through the documents with fresh eyes, he started to notice things he'd missed the first time around. Small inconsistencies in the ecological surveys. Delays in permit approvals that had seemed like bureaucratic red tape but might have been something more deliberate. And then he found it. Buried in a stack of financial documents was a letter from the Environmental Protection Coalition, the group that had funded Diane's legal challenge. The letter was dated 3 weeks before the lawsuit was filed, and it contained a single paragraph that made Richard's blood run cold. Our investigation into Mr. Hale's business practices suggests patterns of permit fraud and environmental cover-ups dating back 10 years. Ms. Crawford's legal action is just the beginning. We have reason to believe that Hale Enterprises has been systematically bribing officials and falsifying environmental reports. We intend to pursue this matter until Mr. Hale faces criminal charges. Richard read the paragraph 3 times before the full implications hit him. They hadn't just been trying to stop one development project. They'd been building a criminal case against him. Diane Crawford hadn't been fighting for the environment, she'd been trying to send him to prison. The case had ended before any of those allegations could be investigated, but that didn't mean they'd been forgotten. Maybe Diane Crawford had been waiting 5 years for another chance to finish what she'd started. And maybe she'd found the perfect weapon, his own daughter. The hotel security footage showed more than kissing. Monica was handing over documents marked, confidential, Hale Enterprises. Richard carved the roast while his daughter carved up his business empire, and neither mentioned what they both knew. The dining room in Richard's Highland Park mansion had been designed to impress. Crystal chandelier casting warm light over the mahogany table, original oil paintings on the walls, Persian rugs that cost more than most people's cars. It was the kind of room where deals were made and alliances were formed, where power was displayed as casually as china. But tonight, it felt like a courtroom. Monica sat at the opposite end of the table, the same seat she'd occupied for Sunday dinners since she was 12 years old. She wore a simple black dress that probably cost more than Jennifer made in a month, her dark hair pulled back in a way that made her look older, more serious. Like she was preparing for battle. "How were your art classes this week?" Richard asked, cutting into the roast beef with surgical precision. The knife made soft scraping sounds against the bone china plate. "Productive," Monica replied, not looking up from her salad. "We're working on color theory. How different shades can completely change the meaning of a composition." "Interesting. What kind of colors are you exploring?" "Blues and greens mostly. Cool tones. My instructor says they create a sense of distance, make the viewer feel separate from the subject." Richard nodded thoughtfully. "Distance can be useful. Sometimes you need perspective to see things clearly." Monica's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "Sometimes distance just makes things harder to understand. Or easier to lie about." The words hung in the air like smoke. Monica set down her fork and finally looked directly at her father. Her green eyes, so much like her mother's, showed no surprise, no guilt, no fear. Just cold calculation. "Are you accusing me of something, Dad?" "Should I be?" They stared at each other across the length of the polished table. The distance between them felt like miles, but Richard could see every micro-expression on his daughter's face. She was good at hiding her emotions. He'd taught her that, but he knew her better than anyone else in the world. Or at least he'd thought he did. "I'm 26 years old," Monica said finally. "I don't need to report my every movement to you. You do when you're lying to me about where you're going." "I never lied." "Art classes, Monica. That's what you told me. 3 days a week, learning to paint, exploring your creative side. I was proud of you for branching out." Monica's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I am taking classes." "In Atlanta?" "From Diane Crawford?" The name dropped between them like a bomb. Monica didn't flinch, didn't deny it, didn't even look surprised that he knew. She just took a sip of her wine and smiled, the same cold smile Richard had seen her use on business rivals and ex-boyfriends. "Her name is Diane. And yes, she's been teaching me things." "I bet she has." "What's that supposed to mean?" Richard set down his knife and leaned back in his chair. "It means that Diane Crawford spent 6 months trying to destroy me in court 5 years ago. It means she called me a criminal on national television. It means she cost me millions of dollars and nearly ruined my reputation. And now, suddenly, she's interested in my daughter. You don't find that suspicious?" "I find it suspicious that you're having me followed. I find it suspicious that you're sleeping with my enemy." The words came out harsher than Richard had intended, but he was past caring about diplomacy. This was his daughter, his only child, and she was being manipulated by someone who wanted to hurt him. Monica's composure finally cracked. Her eyes flashed with anger, and she slammed her hand down on the table hard enough to make the glasses rattle. She's not your enemy, Dad. She's the woman I'm falling in love with. Love? Richard laughed, but there was no humor in it. Monica, you can't be that naive. Diane Crawford doesn't do anything without a reason. If she's with you, it's because she wants something from me. Maybe she wants something from me. Did you ever consider that? Maybe not everything in the world revolves around you and your business empire. When it comes to Diane Crawford, everything revolves around destroying me. That's what she does. That's who she is. Monica stood up so quickly her chair almost fell backward. You don't know her. I know her better than you do. I've seen what she's capable of. And what am I capable of, Dad? The question caught Richard off guard. Monica was standing at the other end of the table with her hands pressed against the wood, leaning forward like she was about to pounce. There was something in her expression he'd never seen before, something dangerous. You're my daughter, he said. You're capable of making better choices than this. Am I? Because according to you, I've been lying to you for months. According to you, I'm so stupid that I can't tell when someone is using me. According to you, I'm just a naive little rich girl who can't take care of herself. That's not what I said. It's what you meant. Monica straightened up and smoothed down her dress. Let me ask you something, Dad. When you were building this empire, did you ever do anything you're not proud of? Did you ever bend a rule or cross a line to get what you wanted? That's different. Is it? Or is it only okay when you do it? Richard felt something cold settle in his chest. Monica, what are you talking about? But she was already walking toward the door. She paused in the doorway and looked back at him with an expression he couldn't read. Enjoy your dinner, Dad. We should do this again soon. What's the most uncomfortable family dinner you've ever sat through? Comment below if you've ever had to pretend everything was normal when you knew secrets were tearing your family apart. After Monica left, Richard sat alone at the table, staring at the two place settings and the half-eaten meal. The house felt too quiet, too empty. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through the messages, looking for something from Monica, some sign that underneath all the anger and deception, his daughter was still there. Instead, he found her phone. She'd left it on the hall table, probably intentionally. The screen was still unlocked, showing a text message that made Richard's hands shake for the first time in 30 years. Phase 2 complete. Ready for Houston connection? The reply came from a number Richard didn't recognize. Perfect. The senator will be very pleased. Proceed as planned. The oil executive's suicide wasn't suicide, and Monica had been in Houston the night he died. The news broke on a Tuesday morning. Houston oil executive found dead in apparent suicide. Richard was reading the Wall Street Journal over breakfast when the headline caught his eye. Thomas Manning, CEO of Lone Star Petroleum, had been found in his downtown office with a single gunshot wound to the head. The police were calling it suicide, citing financial troubles and an ongoing federal investigation into illegal drilling practices. Richard knew Thomas Manning. They'd done business together for years. Manning's company had provided environmental assessments for several of Richard's developments. Manning was crooked as a country road, but he was reliable, and he knew how to keep his mouth shut about the shortcuts they sometimes took to get projects approved. But Thomas Manning was also a coward who would never have the courage to kill himself. If he was facing prison time, he would have run to Mexico or made a deal with the prosecutors. Suicide wasn't his style. Richard was about to turn the page when another detail caught his eye. The security footage from Manning's office building showed him entering alone at 9 p.m., but the timestamp on the footage looked wrong. The numbers were slightly blurred, like they'd been digitally altered. More interesting was what the article didn't mention. There was no suicide note, no explanation, no final message to his family. Just a dead man and a gun that didn't belong to him. Richard pulled out his phone and dialed Marcus, his head of security. I need you to pull Monica's travel records for the past month. Credit card statements, hotel receipts, gas station purchases. Everything. Sir, is there a problem? Just do it. The records arrived an hour later, and Richard spread them across his desk like pieces of a puzzle. Monica's credit card had been used extensively over the past month: restaurants, hotels, gas stations. But the pattern was strange. Most of the charges were in Dallas and Atlanta, which made sense given her regular trips to see Diane. But there were others scattered across Texas: Houston, San Antonio, Austin. And on Monday night, the night before Thomas Manning died, Monica's credit card had been used to pay for a hotel room at the Four Seasons in downtown Houston. Richard stared at the receipt for a long time. Monica had never mentioned Houston. She'd told him she was staying home Monday night, working on a painting for her art class. But the credit card didn't lie. She'd been in Houston, less than 10 blocks from where Thomas Manning would die 12 hours later. He picked up his phone and called the private investigator who'd been following Monica. "Jake, I need you to check something for me. Monday night, Houston, Four Seasons Hotel. I need to know who Monica met with." "Already on it, Mr. Hale. Got the surveillance footage from the hotel. You're not going to like this. Send it to me." The email arrived 5 minutes later. Richard opened the video file and watched his daughter walk through the Four Seasons lobby at 11:30 p.m. Monday night. She wasn't alone. Diane Crawford was with her, along with a man Richard recognized but couldn't immediately place. Richard paused the video and studied the man's face. Tall, silver-haired, expensive suit. There was something familiar about him, something that triggered a memory from years ago. Then it hit him. Senator James Carver. The same Senator James Carver who chaired the Senate Committee on Environmental Oversight. The same committee that had been investigating illegal drilling practices in Texas for the past 2 years. The same committee that had been building a case against companies like Lone Star Petroleum and Thomas Manning. Richard rewound the video and watched it again. Monica, Diane, and Senator Carver walking through the hotel lobby together like old friends. They took the elevator to the 20th floor, the same floor where the penthouse suites were located. How far would you go to protect or expose someone you love? Hit that like button if you've ever discovered something about your family that made you question everything you thought you knew. Richard's phone rang. The caller ID showed Jake's number. "Tell me you have more," Richard said. "Depends on how much you want to know." The senator left the hotel at 2 a.m. Your daughter and Crawford stayed until checkout. But here's the interesting part: Manning's office building is equipped with facial recognition software. Guess whose face shows up on the security cameras at 8:45 p.m. Monday night? Monica. Diane Crawford. She was in Manning's building 15 minutes before he supposedly entered alone. Richard felt something cold settle in his stomach. What about the suicide note? There wasn't one. But there was something else. Manning's laptop was missing from his office. Police assumed the killer took it, but the building security system shows Crawford leaving with a briefcase she didn't have when she entered. The pieces were starting to fit together, but Richard didn't want to see the picture they were forming. His daughter wasn't just dating his enemy, she was helping her commit murder. "Jake, I need you to dig deeper into Senator Carver. Find out what his connection is to all this. And I need you to check on other cases, other business associates who might have died under suspicious circumstances recently. Already ahead of you, boss. Remember Marcus Webb? The building inspector who signed off on your Riverside development? Car accident 3 weeks ago. Brake failure on a brand new Mercedes." Richard's blood ran cold. Marcus Webb had been the key witness in the environmental case 5 years ago. His testimony about soil contamination levels had been crucial to Richard's legal victory. Without Webb's report claiming the wetlands were already contaminated, Diane Crawford might have won her case. "And then there's Judge Patricia Holbrook," Jake continued. "The judge who ruled in your favor in the Crawford case. Heart attack last month. Perfectly healthy 60-year-old woman, no history of heart problems." Richard gripped the phone so hard his knuckles went white. "How many others?" At least 6 that I can confirm. All people connected to the Riverside case. All dead in the past 3 months. All deaths ruled accidental or natural causes. Send me everything you have. After ending the call, Richard sat in his office staring out at the Dallas skyline. Somewhere out there, his daughter was planning his destruction with the woman who'd spent 5 years plotting revenge for a court case she'd lost. But this wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about systematic murder, eliminating witnesses, covering up evidence. And if the pattern continued, Richard knew exactly who would be next on their list. The Houston police detective's call was brief. "Mr. Hale, we need to talk about your daughter's whereabouts on March 15th. The French Quarter holds many secrets, but none darker than what Monica Hale was planning in the shadows of Bourbon Street." Richard's flight to New Orleans landed at midnight. He'd told Jennifer he was taking a personal trip, needed some time to think. The truth was he needed answers, and those answers were hidden in the humid streets of the French Quarter where his daughter had been spending her weekends. The private investigator's report had been thorough. Monica wasn't just visiting Atlanta and Houston, she'd been making regular trips to New Orleans for the past month. Always the same hotel, always meeting with the same group of people. People who had connections to Richard's business empire and reasons to want him destroyed. The Hotel Monteleone sat on Royal Street like an elegant fortress, its rooftop bar offering views of the Mississippi River and the secrets that flowed along its banks. Richard checked into a suite under an assumed name and spread Jake's surveillance photos across the antique desk. Monica with Diane Crawford at Café du Monde, sharing beignets and what looked like legal documents. Monica with Senator Carver at a private dinner club where membership cost more than most people's houses. Monica with 3 men Richard didn't recognize but who carried themselves like federal agents or prosecutors. And then there were the bank records. Richard had used his connections to access Monica's financial information, something he'd never done before but desperation made necessary. What he found made his blood run cold. Over the past 6 months, Monica had been moving money through a series of shell companies registered in Louisiana. Small amounts at first, 10,000 here, 20,000 there. But the pattern was clear. She was building a war chest. His phone buzzed with a text from Jake. Target spotted entering restaurant on Chartres Street. Live surveillance confirms 3 additional subjects present. Richard grabbed his jacket and headed for the door. Whatever Monica was planning, tonight might be his only chance to stop it. Chartres Street pulsed with music and laughter, tourists stumbling between bars while locals moved through the crowd like sharks through schools of fish. Richard found the restaurant Jake had mentioned, an intimate Creole place that served $200 meals to people who discussed $2 million deals. Through the window, he could see Monica at a corner table with 4 other people. Diane Crawford sat to her right, close enough that their shoulders touched. Senator Carver was there, along with a woman Richard recognized as Assistant District Attorney Sarah Mitchell from Dallas County. The 4th person was a young man with a laptop who looked like he could hack into anything with an internet connection. Richard pulled out his phone and activated the recording app. If Monica was planning to destroy him, he needed evidence. Phase 3 is already in motion, Monica's voice carried through the thin glass. The banking records Jake provided show clear patterns of money laundering through the construction contracts. Once the federal investigation goes public, Dad won't be able to claim ignorance. Richard's chest tightened. Jake, his own private investigator, was working for them. What about the timeline? Diane asked, her hand moving to rest on Monica's thigh under the table. The gesture was possessive, claiming. The election is in 18 months. If we're going to destroy him politically, we need to move before he announces his Senate run. Senate run? Richard had never mentioned running for office to anyone, not even Monica. It was something he'd been considering privately, a way to use his wealth and connections to gain real political power. How did they know about plans he hadn't even made public? The beauty of it, Senator Carver said, cutting into his steak like he was dissecting Richard's future, is that we're not just taking down Hale. We're exposing an entire network of corruption that stretches from Dallas to Houston to Baton Rouge. Environmental fraud, political bribery, murder disguised as accidents. When this story breaks, It'll make Watergate look like a parking ticket. Murder. They were talking about the deaths of his business associates like they were chess moves. What about collateral damage? The young man with the laptop asked. Hale Enterprises employs over 3,000 people. When this goes down, a lot of innocent people are going to lose their jobs. Monica's laugh was cold enough to freeze the humid Louisiana air. You can't make an omelet without breaking eggs. Besides, most of those jobs were built on illegal foundations anyway. We're not destroying livelihoods, we're exposing crimes. When did you realize someone's true nature was completely different from what you believed? Drop a comment if you've ever discovered that someone you trusted was capable of things you never imagined. Richard watched his daughter lean forward, her eyes bright with excitement as she outlined the destruction of everything he'd built. This wasn't the Monica he'd raised, the little girl who used to fall asleep on his lap while he read her bedtime stories. This was someone else entirely, someone who'd inherited his ruthlessness but none of his loyalty. The final phase happens in 6 weeks, Monica continued. Dad's birthday party. 500 of the most powerful people in Texas, all gathered in one place to celebrate the man who's about to become the biggest scandal in state history. The federal agents will be waiting outside. When they arrest him, it'll be in front of everyone who matters. Beautiful, Diane said, lifting her wine glass in a mock toast. Absolutely beautiful. Your father destroyed a wetland that had existed for 10,000 years. Now we're going to destroy a legacy that's existed for 30. Richard felt something break inside his chest, not his heart, that had been broken since he first saw the surveillance photos. This was something deeper, something that had to do with the fundamental trust between parent and child. Monica raised her own glass. To justice, she said. To revenge, Diane corrected. As they clinked glasses, Richard stepped away from the window and walked back toward his hotel. The French Quarter swirled around him like a fever dream, but all he could hear was his daughter's voice saying those words, "You can't make an omelet without breaking eggs." 26 years of love, protection, and sacrifice, reduced to broken eggs. The bank records didn't lie. Monica had been funneling Richard's money to his political enemies for 18 months. Monica knew her father was watching, she'd been counting on it all along. The hotel room at the Monteleone was elegant in the way that old money appreciated: crystal chandeliers, antique furniture, windows that had watched over New Orleans for more than a century. Monica stood at one of those windows now, watching the street below where she knew her father's rental car was parked. He's been there for 40 minutes, she said without turning around. Diane looked up from the laptop where she'd been reviewing financial documents. You're sure it's him? Black Mercedes sedan, Louisiana plates, tinted windows. Same car that followed us to dinner last night. Monica finally turned away from the window, and her smile was sharp enough to cut glass. He thinks he's so clever, hiring Jake to spy on me. As if Jake wouldn't come to me the moment Dad started asking questions about my personal life. And you're certain Jake told him everything we wanted him to know? Bank records, travel patterns, meeting locations, all carefully edited to show exactly what we want Dad to see. He thinks he's uncovering a conspiracy to destroy him. He has no idea he's walking into a trap we've been setting for 2 years. Monica moved to the bed where several manila folders were spread across the expensive bedding. Each folder contained a piece of the puzzle she'd been constructing: financial records, witness statements, photographs, audio recordings. Evidence of crimes that went back 15 years, crimes that could send Richard Hale to prison for the rest of his life. But Monica wasn't interested in prison. Prison was too clean, too quick. She wanted her father to experience the same slow destruction he'd inflicted on others. Tell me again why you're doing this, Diane said, closing the laptop and focusing all her attention on Monica. I know my reasons for wanting Richard destroyed. But this is your father. The man who raised you. Monica picked up one of the folders and opened it to a photograph. A family standing in front of a small house, smiling at the camera. The father wore work clothes, the mother held a baby, and 2 young children played at their feet. Do you know who this family is? Monica asked. Diane studied the photograph. Should I? The Hendersons. They lived in East Dallas until 12 years ago, when Dad decided their neighborhood would be perfect for luxury condos. The city condemned their house using eminent domain laws that Dad helped write. They got $10,000 for a home they'd owned for 30 years. Monica turned the photograph over. On the back, someone had written, "Foreclosed March 2012. Father died of heart attack 6 months later. Mother homeless." There are 47 families in this folder, Monica continued. 47 families destroyed so Dad could build his empire. And that's just Dallas. Houston, Austin, San Antonio, the numbers get worse the deeper you dig. Diane reached for another folder. What's in this one? Environmental reports. The real ones, not the doctored versions Dad submitted to get his permits approved. 3 different sites where he built condos on contaminated soil without telling the buyers. Cancer clusters in all 3 neighborhoods now. Children with leukemia whose parents thought they were buying safe homes for their families. The room was quiet except for the sound of jazz music drifting up from Bourbon Street. Diane continued looking through the files, her expression growing darker with each document. Monica, how did you get all this? These are internal company documents, private financial records. Your father's lawyers would have made sure this stuff was buried. Monica's smile was the same one Richard used when he closed a particularly profitable deal. I've been working at Hale Enterprises since I graduated college. Executive assistant to the CEO, which gave me access to everything. Dad thought he was teaching me the business, preparing me to take over someday. Instead, I was documenting every crime, every cover-up, every life he destroyed for profit. For 4 years, you've been gathering evidence against your own father? For 4 years, I've been waiting for the right opportunity to use it. Monica moved to the window again, looking down at her father's rental car. He was still there, probably running surveillance equipment, recording conversations, building his own case against what he thought was a conspiracy. The beautiful thing about Dad, Monica said, is that he taught me everything I know about strategic thinking. Patience, planning, always staying 3 moves ahead of your opponent. He just never considered that someday, I might be his opponent. When did you realize you were the one being played? Comment below if you've ever discovered that you were walking into a trap someone had been setting for months or years. Diane joined Monica at the window. What happens when this is over? When your father is in prison and his empire is destroyed? What happens to us? We disappear, Monica said simply. New identities, new lives, somewhere warm where extradition treaties don't apply. The money we've been moving through the shell companies isn't going to investigators, it's going to offshore accounts we can access from anywhere in the world. And if something goes wrong? If your father figures out what's really happening? Monica reached into her purse and pulled out a small digital recorder. She pressed play, and Richard's voice filled the room. Sometimes you have to eliminate problems permanently. Business is war, and in war, people die. The recording was from a meeting 3 years ago, when Richard had been discussing a competitor who was threatening to expose some of his less legal business practices. The competitor had died in a car accident 2 weeks later. Insurance, Monica said, turning off the recorder. If Dad tries to expose us, the world will hear him admitting to murder on tape. If he tries to claim innocence, we have 47 families and 3 cancer clusters who would love to testify against him. Diane pulled Monica close and kissed her with the intensity of someone who'd found an equal match in destruction. I knew you were special the first time we met, but I had no idea how special. You ain't seen nothing yet, Monica whispered against her lips. Outside, Richard Hale sat in his rental car, watching his daughter's hotel window and believing he was investigating a conspiracy against him. He had no idea he was watching the architect of his destruction put the finishing touches on 2 years of careful planning. Richard's security system captured Monica in his office at 3 a.m., photographing documents he thought were safely hidden. Richard Hale had built an empire by staying calm under pressure, until the night he found his daughter selling his secrets. The flight back to Dallas felt like the longest 3 hours of Richard's life. Every minute that passed was another minute Monica had to cover her tracks, destroy evidence, or disappear completely. But Richard wasn't worried about her running. Monica was too arrogant to run, too convinced of her own superiority to believe she could be caught. That arrogance was going to be her downfall. Richard's house in Highland Park was dark when he arrived at midnight, but his security system showed recent activity. Someone had been in his office. The motion sensors had triggered at 3:17 a.m. the previous night, but the cameras showed nothing. Whoever had been there knew exactly where the blind spots were. Marcus was waiting in the driveway when Richard pulled up. His head of security looked like he'd been awake for days, his usually perfect appearance rumpled and worried. "We've got a problem, boss," Marcus said before Richard could even get out of the car. The office break-in wasn't random. Whoever did it knew exactly what they were looking for. "Show me." They walked through the house to Richard's private office, a room that had been his sanctuary for 15 years. The mahogany desk where he'd planned billion-dollar developments, the safe where he kept his most sensitive documents, the filing cabinets that contained 30 years of business records. Everything looked normal, but Richard knew better. He could feel the violation like a physical presence in the room. The safe wasn't touched, Marcus said, but the filing cabinets were opened. Specifically, the one containing your personal financial records from the past 5 years. Richard moved to the cabinet and pulled out the top drawer. The files were still there, but they'd been reorganized. Someone had gone through every document, probably photographing them. Security footage? That's the interesting part. The cameras were looped, showed empty rooms while someone was actually here. Professional job, someone who knew our system inside and out. Richard pulled out his phone and scrolled through his recent calls until he found Jake's number. The private investigator answered on the first ring. "Jake, I need you to check the security footage from my house for the past week. I want to know who." "Mr. Hale," Jake's voice was tight with something that sounded like fear. "We need to talk. In person. Not over the phone." "What's wrong?" "Everything. Meet me at the office in an hour." "And Mr. Hale?" "Don't trust anyone else with this." "Not Marcus, not Jennifer, not anyone." The line went dead. Richard stared at his phone, a cold suspicion forming in his chest. Jake had been his private investigator for 8 years, had handled dozens of sensitive cases with complete discretion. If Jake was scared, something was very wrong. He turned to Marcus. "I need you to pull all the employment records for everyone who's worked at the house in the past month. Cleaning staff, maintenance, security personnel. Everyone. Sir, our people have been with us for years. They're all thoroughly vetted. Just do it." After Marcus left, Richard sat alone in his violated office, trying to piece together everything he'd learned in New Orleans. Monica was planning to destroy him, that much was clear. But the conversation he'd overheard suggested this went deeper than family revenge. They were talking about federal investigations, Senate races, networks of corruption. How much did they actually know? Richard moved to his desk and opened the bottom drawer, the one that contained his most private files. Documents that could destroy him if they ever became public, bribes disguised as campaign contributions, environmental reports that had been altered to hide contamination, communications with judges who'd ruled in his favor after receiving generous donations to their favorite charities. Everything was still there, but like the other files, these had been moved. Photographed. Copied. Someone had been building a case against him for years, documenting every questionable decision, every moral compromise, every line he'd crossed in building his empire. And that someone was his own daughter. How do you fight someone who knows all your weaknesses because you raised them? Drop a comment if you've ever had to confront someone who used your own love against you as a weapon. Richard's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Dad, we need to talk. Meet me at the office tomorrow at noon. Come alone." He stared at the message for a long time. Monica was finally ready for a direct confrontation, which meant she was confident in her position. She wouldn't call him to the office unless she was certain she held all the cards. But Richard hadn't become a billionaire by backing down from fights, even when the odds were against him. especially when the fight was with someone who'd learned everything she knew from him. He walked to his bedroom and opened the closet safe where he kept his most important documents: insurance policies against enemies, evidence of crimes committed by business rivals, recordings of conversations that could destroy political careers. If Monica wanted to play hardball, he'd show her who invented the game. The next morning, Richard arrived at Hale Enterprises early. The 40-story building rose from downtown Dallas like a monument to his success, glass and steel reaching toward the sky with arrogant confidence. He'd built this empire from nothing, and he'd be damned if he let anyone, even his own daughter, tear it down. Jennifer was already at her desk when Richard walked through the reception area. She looked up with the professional smile she'd perfected over 8 years of working for him, but Richard caught something in her eyes. Fear? Guilt? Good morning, Mr. Hale. Monica is already here. She's waiting in the conference room. How long has she been here? Since 7. She said she needed to prepare for your meeting. 2 hours to prepare. 2 hours to set whatever trap she'd been planning. Richard nodded and walked toward the conference room, every step feeling like he was approaching his own execution. The conference room occupied the corner of the 40th floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering views of the city Richard had conquered. Monica sat at the head of the long table, his seat, the position of power in every meeting held in this room. She wore a black business suit that made her look older, more serious. Professional. Like she was preparing for a hostile takeover, which Richard realized was exactly what this was. Hello, Dad, she said without looking up from the tablet in front of her. Thank you for coming. This is my building, Monica. My office. I didn't come here, I work here. Not for much longer. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Monica finally looked up, and Richard saw something in her eyes he'd never seen before. Not anger, not hatred, not even disappointment. Cold calculation. You want to explain what that means? Richard asked, taking a seat across from her. He refused to be intimidated by his own daughter, no matter how much she'd learned about power games. It means that in approximately 6 hours, federal agents will arrive with warrants to seize every computer, every file, and every financial record in this building. It means that by tonight, you'll be under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, bribery, environmental crimes, and accessory to murder. Richard's expression didn't change. Based on what evidence? Monica slid a thick manila folder across the table. Based on 15 years of documented crimes. Bank records showing payments to judges and politicians. Environmental reports that were falsified to hide contamination. Audio recordings of you ordering the deaths of business rivals. Richard opened the folder and looked at the documents inside. His own handwriting, his own signature, his own voice captured on recordings he'd forgotten existed. Evidence he'd thought was safely hidden, now organized like a prosecutor's case file. Where did you get all this? You gave it to me, Dad. For years of working as your assistant, for years of access to your files, your computer, your private conversations. You taught me to be thorough, to document everything, to always have insurance against my enemies. I'm not your enemy, Monica. No? Monica's smile was sharp enough to draw blood. Then why did you have me followed? Why did you break into my hotel room? Why did you hire Jake to spy on my personal life? Because I was trying to protect you. From Diane Crawford, from whatever she was planning. Diane isn't planning anything, Dad. I am. Diane was just the perfect cover story, someone you'd naturally suspect of wanting revenge. While you were watching her, you completely missed what was really happening. Richard felt something cold spread through his chest. Which was what? Monica's response was ice cold. You taught me everything I know about taking what I want, Daddy. Richard Hale didn't become a billionaire by playing fair, and he wouldn't lose to his own daughter by showing mercy. The conference room fell silent except for the hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of Dallas traffic 40 floors below. Richard stared at his daughter across the table, seeing not the little girl he'd raised but a predator who'd learned everything she knew from watching him destroy his enemies. You think you've won, Richard said, his voice calm despite the storm building in his chest. I know I have. The federal task force has been building this case for 2 years, Dad. Every bribe, every cover-up, every suspicious death connected to your business empire. When they arrest you tonight, it won't be some minor tax evasion charge. This is life in prison without possibility of parole. Richard closed the folder and slid it back across the table. You made one mistake, Monica. Which was? You assumed I'd sit here and let you destroy everything I built. Richard stood up and straightened his tie, the same gesture he'd made before walking into every important negotiation of his career. You're my daughter, and I love you. But love doesn't make me stupid. Monica's confident smile flickered for the first time. What are you talking about? I'm talking about the fact that I know about the offshore accounts. The ones you and Diane have been using to funnel money away from the shell companies. $37 million, to be exact, spread across banks in the Cayman Islands, Switzerland, and Belize. The color drained from Monica's face. That's impossible. Those accounts are untraceable. Nothing is untraceable when you have the right connections. Did you really think I'd spend 30 years building a network of politicians, bankers, and law enforcement officials without keeping detailed records of every favor they owe me? Richard walked to the window and looked out at the city skyline. Judge Martinez from the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. I paid for his daughter's wedding and his son's Harvard tuition. Senator Williams from the Banking Committee. I've been funding his campaigns for 8 years. Director Harrison at the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. His wife's medical bills for her cancer treatment came to over $2 million. I covered every penny. Monica was trying to hide it, but Richard could see the panic starting to creep into her eyes. You're bluffing. Am I? Richard turned back to face his daughter. By now, Judge Martinez has signed warrants freezing all the accounts connected to your investigation. Senator Williams has convinced the task force to delay any arrests pending a review of their evidence. And Director Harrison is very interested in having a conversation with you about financial fraud and conspiracy to commit extortion. The tablet in Monica's hands was shaking slightly. She was trying to maintain her composure, but Richard had taught her too well to hide her emotions. He could see every micro-expression, every tell that indicated her perfect plan was falling apart. The beautiful thing about power, Monica, is that it's not just about money. It's about relationships. You spent 4 years collecting evidence against me, but I spent 30 years collecting evidence against everyone else. The difference is, my evidence can destroy judges and senators and FBI directors. Your evidence can only destroy me. When did you realize you were fighting the wrong battle? Comment below if you've ever discovered that your opponent had been playing chess while you were playing checkers. Monica's phone buzzed against the table. She glanced at it, and whatever message she saw made her face go completely white. Diane? Richard asked. Monica nodded, unable to speak. Let me guess. The FBI raided her law office this morning. Seized all her computers, froze her bank accounts, arrested her on charges of conspiracy and racketeering. They found evidence linking her to the murders of my business associates, evidence that was planted in her office by people who work for me. You framed her. I protected myself. Diane Crawford tried to destroy me 5 years ago in court. When that failed, she decided to use my own daughter to finish the job. Did you really think I'd let that happen? Monica stood up so quickly her chair fell backward. She loves me. She used you. Just like you used me. The only difference is, I saw it coming. Richard moved closer to his daughter, close enough to see the tears starting to form in her eyes. For the first time since this nightmare began, he saw something of the little girl he'd raised, the child who used to run to him when she was scared or hurt. Monica, you still have a choice. Help me clean up this mess, and we can make this all go away. The federal task force will discover that their evidence was fabricated by Diane Crawford as part of an elaborate revenge scheme. She'll go to prison, you'll be seen as another one of her victims, and we can rebuild what we've lost. And if I don't? Richard's expression hardened. Then you go down with her. Conspiracy, fraud, accessory to murder, the same charges she's facing. The only difference is, she'll die in prison and you'll spend the rest of your life there. Monica wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, and when she looked up at Richard, her expression was a mixture of hatred and admiration. I underestimated you, she said. You forgot who raised you. Monica walked to the window and stared out at the Dallas skyline, the same view Richard had been looking at when he made the decision to destroy everyone who threatened his empire. What do you want me to do? She asked finally. I want you to call the federal task force and tell them you've been manipulated by Diane Crawford. I want you to turn over all the evidence she convinced you to gather, evidence that was selectively edited to make me look guilty. And I want you to testify against her when this goes to trial. Monica was quiet for a long time. Richard could see her calculating, weighing her options, trying to find an angle that would let her salvage something from the wreckage of her perfect plan. If I do this, she said, what happens to us? To our relationship? Richard moved to stand beside his daughter at the window. Below them, Dallas spread out like a kingdom they ruled together. That depends on whether you learned your lesson. The FBI raid on Diane's office happened at dawn, but Monica was already 3 steps ahead. The family fortune that took Richard 30 years to build was disappearing in 30 days, and his daughter held the keys to every vault. The federal task force meeting was held in a windowless conference room in the FBI building, the kind of sterile space where careers were made and destroyed with equal efficiency. Monica sat at one end of the table facing 6 agents, 2 prosecutors, and a stenographer who recorded every word like she was documenting the end of the world. Which, in many ways, she was. Miss Hale, Agent Rodriguez said, sliding a digital recorder across the table, we need you to start from the beginning. When did Diane Crawford first approach you? Monica looked down at her hands, playing the role of the manipulated daughter perfectly. Richard watched from the observation room through one-way glass, admiring her performance despite everything that had happened between them. It was about 2 years ago, Monica said, her voice just shaky enough to suggest trauma without seeming rehearsed. I was having coffee in Atlanta after visiting the High Museum. She approached me, said she recognized me from newspaper photos. And you had no idea who she was? Not at first. She seemed nice, sophisticated. We talked about art, about travel. She bought me lunch and gave me her card. It wasn't until our 3rd meeting that she mentioned knowing my father. Agent Rodriguez leaned forward. What exactly did she say about your father? She said he was a criminal who destroyed lives and gotten away with it because he had money and connections. She said she'd tried to expose him in court years ago, but he'd bribed judges and intimidated witnesses. The lies flowed from Monica's lips like water, each one carefully constructed to paint Diane as the mastermind and herself as the victim. Richard had coached her for 3 days, helping her create a story that would explain all the evidence while shifting blame away from their family. Did she ask you to spy on your father? Prosecutor Williams asked. She said she wanted justice. She convinced me that my father was responsible for deaths, for environmental contamination that was giving children cancer. She made me believe I had a moral obligation to help her gather evidence. Monica's eyes filled with tears, real tears, Richard noted with professional appreciation. His daughter had always been a gifted actress. She seduced me, Monica continued. Made me fall in love with her. Used my feelings to manipulate me into stealing documents from my father's office, copying financial records, recording private conversations. I thought I was doing the right thing. What matters more, family loyalty or personal justice? Hit that like button if you've ever had to choose between doing what felt right and protecting someone you love. Agent Rodriguez looked at his notes. We found evidence that you opened several offshore bank accounts and moved money through shell companies. Can you explain that? Diane told me we needed to protect the evidence, keep it safe from my father's influence. She said the money was for bribes, paying witnesses to testify, buying protection for people who were afraid to come forward. I didn't know she was stealing it. How much money are we talking about, Miss Hale? Monica looked directly into the camera that was recording her testimony. $37 million. Money she convinced me to take from my father's accounts and transfer to banks where he couldn't touch it. She said it was restitution for his victims. Richard smiled despite everything. Monica was good, better than good. She was taking the most damaging evidence against their family and turning it into proof of Diane's manipulation. The questioning continued for 4 hours. Monica described how Diane had coached her to seduce information out of Richard's business associates, how she'd been instructed to document meetings and record conversations, how she'd been promised a new life once her father was in prison. Did Ms. Crawford ever discuss violence? Plans to harm your father or his associates? Monica's face went pale, and she gripped the edge of the table. She said some people deserved to die for their crimes. She had a list of names: judges, inspectors, witnesses from the old court case. She said they were all guilty of helping my father cover up his crimes. Did she ask you to participate in any violent acts? She wanted me to put something in my father's drink at his birthday party. A drug that would make him sick, maybe kill him. She said it would look like a heart attack, that no one would suspect anything because of his age and stress level. Richard felt a chill run down his spine. Monica was improvising now, adding details they hadn't discussed. But the lies sounded so convincing that for a moment, he almost believed them himself. "Where is this drug now?" Agent Rodriguez asked. "I threw it away. I couldn't go through with it." That's when I realized what Diane really was, not a crusader for justice, but a sociopath who wanted my father dead. Monica broke down completely then, sobbing into her hands while the federal agents looked at each other with satisfied expressions. They had their case, a clear narrative of manipulation and fraud with a sympathetic victim who was ready to testify against the real criminal. After the interview ended, Monica was escorted to a safe house where she'd stay until Diane's trial. Richard met with Agent Rodriguez in his office, playing the role of the concerned father whose daughter had been corrupted by a master manipulator. "We'll need your cooperation too, Mr. Hale," Rodriguez said. "There may be evidence that Crawford planted in your files, forged documents designed to make you look guilty of crimes you didn't commit." "Of course," Richard said, shaking the agent's hand. "Whatever you need to make sure that woman pays for what she did to my family." Walking out of the FBI building, Richard felt something he hadn't experienced in 30 years, genuine fear. Not fear of prosecution or prison or financial ruin, but fear of what his daughter had become. Monica hadn't just learned to lie and manipulate, she'd learned to enjoy it. She'd looked him in the eye and improvised a story about poisoning him, her own father, with the same cold calculation she'd used to order lunch. Richard had created a monster, and now he had to find a way to live with it. The phone call came from an unknown number. "Mr. Hale, your daughter has something that belongs to me." Monica thought she was playing chess with her father. Until she discovered someone else had been moving the pieces all along. The abandoned warehouse in East Dallas looked like every other forgotten building in the industrial district. Broken windows, rusted metal siding, weeds growing through cracks in the concrete. But inside, it was a different world entirely. Computer screens lined the walls, surveillance equipment hummed quietly in the corners, and maps of Texas covered every available surface with red pins marking locations across the state. Monica stood in the center of it all, watching Diane pace back and forth like a caged animal. They'd been meeting here for weeks now, planning their next moves against Richard, but tonight something was different. Diane was nervous, which was unusual. Diane was never nervous. "The Houston situation is getting complicated," Diane said, not looking at Monica. "The police are asking too many questions about Manning's death." "I thought you said it was clean." "No witnesses, no evidence." "It was clean. But your father has connections in the Houston Police Department. He's pushing them to investigate further." Monica felt a familiar twist of anxiety in her stomach. Every plan they'd made seemed to anticipate her father's moves, but Richard Hale hadn't built an empire by being predictable. He was always 3 steps ahead, always thinking of angles other people missed. "Maybe we should slow down," Monica said. "Take a break until things cool off." Diane stopped pacing and turned to face her. There was something in her expression that Monica had never seen before, something that looked almost like pity. Monica, there's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you months ago. What? This whole thing, everything we've been doing together, it wasn't my idea. Monica's blood turned cold. What do you mean? I mean someone hired me to get close to you. Someone who wanted to use our relationship to get to your father. The warehouse suddenly felt too small, too quiet. Monica could hear her own heartbeat echoing in her ears. Who? Before Diane could answer, a door opened at the far end of the warehouse. A man stepped out of the shadows, tall and silver-haired, wearing the same expensive suit Monica had seen in the Houston hotel surveillance footage. Senator James Carver walked toward them with the confident stride of someone who owned everything he touched. His smile was warm and political, the kind that had won him 3 elections and a reputation as a champion of environmental justice. Monica, he said, extending his hand. It's so good to finally meet you properly. Monica didn't take his hand. You're the one behind all this. I'm the one trying to save this state from men like your father. Carver lowered his hand but kept smiling. Do you know how many wetlands he's destroyed? How many protected habitats he's turned into shopping malls and condos? How many officials he's bribed to look the other way? That's not. It is true, Monica. All of it. Your father is a criminal who's been hiding behind lawyers and politicians for 30 years. I'm just evening the scales. Monica looked back and forth between Diane and Carver, trying to process what she was hearing. How long have you two been working together? Since the beginning, Carver said. Miss Crawford lost her case against your father 5 years ago because the system was rigged. Judges bought off, witnesses intimidated, evidence suppressed. But I promised her we'd find another way to get justice. By using me. By giving you a chance to do the right thing. Carver stepped closer, and Monica could smell his cologne, expensive and cloying. Your father has built his empire on corruption and environmental destruction. You have the power to stop him. And if I don't? Carver's smile never wavered. Then he goes to prison anyway, but you go down with him. Because the evidence we've collected over the past months doesn't just implicate Richard. It implicates Monica Hale as his co-conspirator in multiple federal crimes. Monica's legs suddenly felt weak. What evidence? Bank records showing transfers from Hale Enterprises to offshore accounts linked to bribery schemes. Phone recordings of you discussing illegal permit applications. Video footage of you delivering cash payments to building inspectors. I never. You did. Every time you thought you were helping me gather information about your father's business, you were actually creating evidence of your own involvement. Every document you photographed, every conversation you recorded, every meeting you attended, it all paints a picture of Monica Hale as an active participant in her father's criminal enterprise. Monica turned to Diane, searching her face for some sign that this was all a mistake, some indication that the woman she'd been falling in love with hadn't been lying to her all along. Diane? Diane wouldn't meet her eyes. I'm sorry, Monica. I really am. But this is bigger than just us. You used me. I used the situation. Your father made enemies, Monica. Powerful enemies who've been waiting years for a chance to bring him down. When I told Senator Carver about our relationship, he saw an opportunity. So everything between us was fake? For the first time since Carver had entered the warehouse, Diane's composure cracked. She looked directly at Monica, and there were tears in her eyes. Not everything, she whispered. I didn't expect to fall in love with you. Have you ever realized you were fighting the wrong battle? Drop a comment below if you've discovered that someone you trusted was playing a completely different game than you thought. Carver cleared his throat. This is all very touching, but we have work to do. Monica, you have a choice to make. Help us bring your father to justice, and you walk away clean. Refuse, and you go down with him. And if I help you, what happens to him? Richard Hale spends the rest of his life in federal prison, where he belongs. His assets are seized and distributed to the communities he's harmed. And you get to start over with a clean slate. Monica stared at the maps on the walls, at the red pins marking all the places her father had built developments. She'd grown up visiting these sites, watching empty lots transform into shopping centers and housing communities. She'd been proud of what he'd accomplished, proud to be part of something that created jobs and homes for thousands of people. But now she was seeing it through different eyes. How many wetlands had been destroyed? How many species displaced? How many laws bent or broken in the name of progress? "I need time to think," she said. "You have until tomorrow night," Carver replied. "There's a board meeting at Hale Enterprises on Thursday morning. We need you to plant recording devices in your father's office before that meeting. The conversation we capture will be the final piece of evidence we need." "And if I refuse?" "Then the FBI receives an anonymous tip about Monica Hale's involvement in a conspiracy to murder federal witnesses. Starting with Thomas Manning." Monica's hand started shaking. "I didn't kill anyone. But you were in Houston the night he died. You were in his office building. You have no alibi for the time of death. And Diane's testimony will place you at the scene." Monica turned to Diane, but Diane was looking at the floor. "Would you really do that to me?" Monica asked. "I don't want to," Diane said quietly. "But I will if I have to. This is about justice, Monica. Sometimes justice requires sacrifice." Diane's midnight confession changed everything. "Monica, I was hired to destroy your family, but I never expected to fall in love with you." The two people who hated each other most in Dallas were about to discover they needed each other to survive. Richard's home office had been turned into a war room. Maps, documents, and photographs covered every surface. The walls were lined with whiteboards showing connections between names, dates, and locations. It looked like the kind of setup you'd see in a police procedural, except this time, Richard was both the detective and the target. The knock on his door came at exactly midnight. Richard had been expecting it, but his hands still moved instinctively to the gun in his desk drawer as he called out, "Come in." Monica stepped through the doorway, and Richard's heart broke a little. His daughter looked exhausted, with dark circles under her eyes and her usually perfect hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. She wore jeans and a simple t-shirt instead of her usual designer clothes, and she was carrying a small black device that Richard recognized as a recording device. "They sent you to wire my office," he said. It wasn't a question. Monica nodded and held up the device. "I'm supposed to plant this before your board meeting tomorrow. Are you going to?" "I don't know." Monica looked around the room, taking in all the evidence Richard had collected. "Jesus, Dad. What is all this?" "Proof that Senator Carver and Diane Crawford have been systematically murdering anyone connected to our court case 5 years ago. Proof that they've been planning to frame us for crimes we didn't commit. Proof that everything they've told you about me is a lie." Monica walked over to one of the whiteboards and studied the timeline Richard had constructed. Thomas Manning's death was marked in red, connected by lines to 6 other suspicious deaths over the past 3 months. Marcus Webb, she read aloud. Judge Holbrook. Dr. Peterson. I remember some of these names from when I was younger. They were all witnesses in the environmental case. All people who could testify about the real evidence, the real facts, not the version Carver and Crawford want the world to believe. Monica turned to face her father. "So tell me the real version." Richard had been preparing for this conversation for weeks, but now that it was happening, he didn't know where to start. "How do you explain 30 years of business decisions to someone who's been taught to see you as a villain?" "The Riverside development was legal," he said finally. "Every permit properly obtained, every environmental study conducted by licensed professionals. The wetlands were already contaminated by industrial runoff from factories that had been there for 50 years. We weren't destroying pristine habitat, we were cleaning up someone else's mess and turning it into something useful." But Diane said what she needed to say to make her case. She cherry-picked data, ignored inconvenient facts, and presented a narrative that would generate the most public sympathy. "That's what lawyers do, Monica. They tell stories, not necessarily truth." Monica was quiet for a long time, studying the evidence spread across Richard's desk. Bank records, environmental reports, witness statements, all telling a different story than the one she'd been hearing for months. "Why didn't you ever tell me any of this?" she asked. "Because I wanted to protect you from it. I wanted you to be able to believe in something pure, something good. I never wanted you to see how ugly business can be, how complicated the world really is. So instead you let me think you were some kind of environmental destroyer? I let you form your own opinions. I thought when you were older, when you had more experience, you'd understand that sometimes good people have to make difficult choices." Monica picked up a photograph from Richard's desk, surveillance footage of her and Diane outside the Houston hotel. "How long have you known about Diane?" "Since the first night you met her." "About Carver's involvement?" "Since yesterday." "And you didn't try to stop me?" Richard was quiet for a moment. "Would you have listened?" Monica laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Probably not. When did you have to choose between love and family? Comment below if you've ever been caught between someone you cared about and someone who raised you." "Monica," Richard said carefully, "I need you to understand something. What Carver and Diane are doing, it's not about justice. It's about power. Carver wants to position himself as an environmental hero for his next presidential campaign. Diane wants revenge for losing a case where she was wrong about the facts. They're using you to get to me, but they're also using me to get to something bigger." "What do you mean?" Richard walked over to another whiteboard, this one covered with financial documents and corporate structures. "Carver doesn't just want to destroy Hale Enterprises. He wants to seize our assets and redistribute them to companies he has financial interests in. Look at this." He pointed to a complex diagram showing connections between environmental groups, political action committees, and development companies. Every wetland Carver has saved in the past 5 years has ended up being developed by companies linked to his wife's investment firm. He's not protecting the environment, he's eliminating competition so his people can profit instead. Monica studied the diagram, and Richard could see her putting the pieces together. So this was never about right and wrong. It was always about money and power. It always is. But what about Diane? What's her angle in all this? Richard hesitated. This was the part he didn't want to explain, the part that would hurt Monica the most. "I don't think Diane cares about the money. I think she genuinely believed her own story about environmental justice, at least at first. But somewhere along the way, it became personal. She can't accept that she was wrong about the Riverside case, so she's convinced herself that I must be guilty of something else. And me? You were a way to get to me. But Monica, I've seen the way she looks at you in those surveillance photos. I don't think she expected to develop real feelings." Monica was quiet for a long time, processing everything Richard had shown her. Finally, she looked up at him with tears in her eyes. "I've been so stupid. You've been manipulated by professionals. There's a difference. What do we do now?" Richard walked over to his daughter and put his hands on her shoulders. "We fight back. Together." "How?" "Tomorrow morning, you're going to plant that recording device in my office, just like they asked. But it's going to be one of my recording devices, not theirs. And the conversation it records is going to expose their entire operation." Monica wiped her eyes and stood up straighter. For the first time since she'd entered the room, she looked like the strong, determined woman Richard had raised. "What do you need me to do?" The assassination attempt failed by inches, and Monica realized the target wasn't her father. Monica Hale stood at the crossroads between love and legacy, holding the evidence that would save her family and destroy her heart. The FBI field office in downtown Dallas buzzed with activity even at 7 in the morning. Agents moved through the corridors with purpose, carrying files and speaking in hushed tones about ongoing investigations. Monica sat in a small conference room, waiting for Agent Sarah Rodriguez to review the evidence she'd brought. Spread across the table were financial records, surveillance footage, recorded conversations, and documents that painted a clear picture of Senator Carver's conspiracy. 3 months of investigation had led to this moment, the chance to expose the truth and clear her family's name. But the cost would be everything she thought she'd found with Diane. "This is extensive," Agent Rodriguez said, looking up from a stack of bank records. "How long have you been gathering this information?" "My father started collecting evidence weeks ago," Monica replied. "I've been helping him for the past few days." "And you're certain about the authenticity of these recordings?" Monica nodded toward a small digital device on the table. "Everything's time-stamped and verified." The conversation between Carver and his financial advisor clearly shows he's been using environmental causes to eliminate business competition. The recorded phone calls prove he ordered the murders of witnesses from the Riverside case. Agent Rodriguez picked up another document. "What about Miss Crawford?" "According to these transcripts, she seems to have been genuinely motivated by environmental concerns, at least initially." "She was," Monica said quietly. "But she got pulled deeper into Carver's scheme. By the time she realized what was really happening, she was already too involved to get out clean." "And your relationship with her?" Monica's chest tightened. "Complicated." That was an understatement. 3 days ago, Diane had called Monica's phone at 2 in the morning, sobbing and terrified. Carver had discovered that Monica was working with her father instead of against him, and he'd made it clear that loose ends needed to be tied up permanently. "He's going to kill us both," Diane had whispered into the phone. "Monica, I'm so sorry. I never wanted any of this to happen." "Where are you?" "Safe house in Austin." "But not for long. He has people everywhere." Monica had driven to Austin alone, against her father's wishes, and found Diane in a cheap motel on the outskirts of the city. The woman who'd once commanded courtrooms with confidence and grace was now a broken shell, jumping at every sound and checking the locks on the doors every few minutes. They'd spent the night talking, really talking, for the first time since they'd met. Diane had explained how Carver had approached her after the Riverside case, promising her a chance for revenge and justice. How the plan had started small but grown into something monstrous. How she'd tried to back out when she realized she was falling in love with Monica, only to discover that Carver had evidence linking her to the murders. "I never killed anyone," Diane had insisted, tears streaming down her face. "But I was there when some of it happened. I provided information that Carver's people used. I'm as guilty as if I'd pulled the trigger myself." Monica had held her while she cried, feeling her own heart break with the knowledge that their relationship had been built on lies but had somehow become real despite everything. Now, sitting in the FBI conference room, Monica had to make the final choice between protecting the woman she loved and protecting her family. "Ms. Hale," Agent Rodriguez said, "we're going to need Ms. Crawford to testify against Senator Carver. With her cooperation, we can build a solid case for conspiracy, murder, and federal corruption charges." "And if she cooperates?" "Immunity deal. She testifies truthfully about Carver's operation, and she walks away with a clean slate." Monica closed her eyes. "What do you need from me? What would you sacrifice for your family's survival?" Drop a comment below if you've ever had to choose between protecting someone you love and doing what's right. The operation took place at the Anatole Hotel in downtown Dallas. Carver had arranged a meeting with several potential investors, planning to celebrate what he thought would be Richard Hale's final downfall. He didn't know that FBI agents were positioned throughout the hotel, or that Monica was wearing a wire, or that Diane was in federal protective custody preparing to testify against him. Monica walked through the hotel lobby wearing a simple black dress and a nearly invisible recording device. Her hands weren't shaking, and her voice was steady when she greeted Carver's assistant. 3 months of deception and manipulation had taught her how to hide her true feelings. "Senator Carver is expecting you," the assistant said, leading Monica toward the elevator. "He's very pleased with your recent work." The penthouse suite was exactly what Monica had expected: expensive, tasteful, designed to impress. Carver stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the Dallas skyline with the satisfaction of someone who believed he owned everything he could see. "Monica," he said without turning around. "I trust you've completed your assignment?" "The recording devices are in place," Monica lied smoothly. "My father's office and conference room are both wired." Excellent. By tomorrow morning, we'll have everything we need to destroy Richard Hale once and for all. Carver turned to face her, and Monica saw something in his expression that made her stomach clench. There's just one more thing we need to take care of. What? Diane Crawford has become a liability. She's developed feelings for you that are clouding her judgment. She's talking about backing out of our arrangement. Monica kept her face neutral. What do you want me to do about it? I want you to kill her. The words hung in the air like poison. Monica felt her blood turn to ice, but she forced herself to stay calm. Senator, I'm not a killer. You are whatever I need you to be, Carver said, his voice hardening. Don't forget, Monica, I have evidence that implicates you in multiple federal crimes. Unless you want to spend the next 20 years in prison, you'll do exactly what I tell you. And if I refuse? Carver smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Then you and your father both die tonight, and Diane Crawford takes the blame for everything. Tragic story. Jilted lover murders the Hale family in a fit of rage, then kills herself out of guilt. Monica realized with crystal clarity that she was looking at a true sociopath. This wasn't about environmental justice or even revenge anymore. This was about a man who enjoyed having the power to destroy lives and would eliminate anyone who threatened that power. Where is she? Monica asked. Safe house on the south side of town. Address is in this envelope, along with everything you'll need to make it look like suicide. Carver handed Monica a manila envelope. Inside were an address, a key, and a small handgun. You have 2 hours, Carver said. Text me when it's done. Monica nodded and turned to leave, but Carver's voice stopped her at the door. Monica? Don't even think about double-crossing me. I have people watching both you and your father. If you try to warn her or if you don't follow through, Richard Hale dies tonight. As Diane was led away in handcuffs, she whispered something that made Monica's blood run cold. He never planned to let any of us survive. Father and daughter stood in the ruins of their empire, discovering that some things can't be bought, including forgiveness. The Hale Enterprises building stood empty for the first time in 30 years. Federal agents had removed boxes of evidence, sealed off entire floors, and frozen all company assets pending the investigation into Senator Carver's conspiracy. The empire that Richard had built from nothing was now just a ghost of its former self. Monica stood in her father's office, looking out at the Dallas skyline through windows that would soon belong to someone else. The FBI had cleared the Hale family of any wrongdoing, but the damage to their reputation and business was extensive. Some wounds couldn't be healed with legal vindication. The lawyers say we'll get most of the assets back eventually, Richard said, joining Monica at the window. The investigations will take months, maybe years, but we'll survive this. Will we? Monica asked. Look at us, Dad. Really look at us. 3 months ago, I was ready to destroy you based on lies someone else told me. You were willing to have me followed and investigated rather than just talking to me. What kind of family does that make us? Richard was quiet for a moment. The kind of family that's been hurt so many times we forgot how to trust each other. Monica turned to face him. When did we become strangers living in the same house? When your mother died, Richard said simply. I was so afraid of losing you too that I tried to control everything you did, everyone you met, every choice you made. I thought if I could just keep you safe and close, nothing bad would ever happen again. And I was so angry about losing her that I spent years pushing you away, looking for someone who would let me make my own mistakes. We both found what we were looking for. I found ways to control your life, and you found someone who encouraged you to rebel against me. Monica laughed, but there were tears in her eyes. Diane wasn't encouraging rebellion. She was encouraging treason. But you saw through it eventually. You chose family over revenge. I chose truth over lies. There's a difference. Richard walked over to his desk, the same desk where he'd spread out evidence of the conspiracy, where he'd made the phone calls that had ultimately brought down Senator Carver. Now it was empty except for a single photograph of Monica and her mother from years earlier. I've been thinking about selling the company, he said. Monica was shocked. Dad, Hale Enterprises is your life's work. My life's work should have been being your father. The company was just how I kept score. How do you rebuild trust after it's been completely shattered? Comment below if you've ever had to start over with someone you love, someone you thought you'd lost forever. So what do we do now? Monica asked. We start over. Different company, different approach, different relationship between us. Equal partners instead of father and daughter playing power games. You'd really want me as a partner? After everything I've done? Richard walked over to Monica and put his hands on her shoulders. Monica, you spent 3 months infiltrating a criminal conspiracy and gathering evidence that saved both our lives and brought down one of the most corrupt politicians in the country. I'd say you've more than proven yourself. I also fell in love with someone who was using me to get to you. And then you chose to do the right thing even though it broke your heart. That takes more strength than I've ever shown. Monica wiped her eyes and looked around the empty office one more time. What about Diane? What about her? She's in witness protection now. New identity, new life somewhere far away from Texas. Part of me wants to hate her for what she did, but part of me still loves her. Yeah. Is that crazy? Richard considered the question seriously. I don't think love is ever crazy, Monica. Misguided sometimes, based on false information, but not crazy. You fell in love with the person Diane could have been if she'd made different choices. And now I'll never know if that person was real. Maybe that's for the best. Some questions don't have good answers. They stood together in the empty office, father and daughter reunited by crisis and tempered by truth. Outside, Dallas continued its relentless growth, new buildings rising where old ones had been torn down, the city constantly reinventing itself just like its people. Dad? Yeah? I'm sorry. For all of it. For not trusting you, for believing lies about you, for putting us both in danger. I'm sorry too. For not talking to you sooner, for not trusting you with the truth, for letting our relationship get so damaged that someone else could use it against us. Monica hugged her father, really hugged him, for the first time in years. It felt like coming home after a long journey through hostile territory. So what's the plan? She asked. Small development projects to start. Affordable housing, community centers, things that actually help people instead of just making money. Sounds boring. Good. I'm tired of excitement. Monica smiled. I'm not. I think I want to go back to school, get a law degree. Following in Diane's footsteps. Following my own path. But using some of the skills she taught me for good instead of revenge. Richard nodded approvingly. Environmental law? Corporate defense. Someone needs to protect honest businessmen from people like Senator Carver. And dishonest businessmen? They can protect themselves. The visitor at their door was unexpected, Diane's identical twin sister, carrying secrets that could change everything again. The Hale family name had been tested by betrayal, tempered by truth, and would be defined by the choices they made next. 1 year later, the Hale Community Development Center occupied a modest building in downtown Dallas, far from the gleaming towers of Richard's former empire. The office was smaller, simpler, but it buzzed with the energy of people who believed in what they were doing. Monica sat at her desk, reviewing proposals for low-income housing projects and community health clinics. Her law school acceptance letter was framed on the wall next to architectural drawings for their latest development, a combination affordable housing and environmental education center that would be built on the site of the former Riverside Park. Full circle, Richard had said when they'd first visited the location. Maybe we can finally do it right this time. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. The wetlands that had started their family's destruction would now be the foundation for their redemption. They were partnering with local environmental groups to create a model sustainable community that would prove development and conservation could coexist. Richard knocked on Monica's office door and entered without waiting for permission, a habit that used to annoy her but now felt comfortingly familiar. The city council approved our proposal, he said, setting a stack of papers on her desk. Groundbreaking next month. And the environmental groups? Full support. Turns out when you actually listen to their concerns and incorporate their suggestions, they're pretty reasonable people. Monica smiled. Who would have thought? The past year had been about rebuilding more than just their business. It had been about rebuilding their relationship, learning to trust each other again, finding ways to work together without the power struggles that had defined their interactions for so many years. Monica had thrown herself into the legal and regulatory aspects of their new business, discovering a talent for navigating complex environmental regulations and community development policies. Richard had focused on the financial and construction management side, using his decades of experience to make their projects viable and profitable. Together, they'd created something neither could have built alone, a company that made money while making a difference, that grew their wealth while growing their community. There's something else, Richard said, his tone shifting to something more serious. Agent Rodriguez called this morning. Carver's appeals have been exhausted. He's going to federal prison for life. Monica nodded. She'd testified at Carver's trial, describing his conspiracy and his attempt to blackmail her into murder. The experience had been painful but cathartic, a chance to publicly reject the lies and manipulation that had nearly destroyed her family. Any word on Diane? She asked. Richard hesitated. They rarely talked about Diane anymore, but Monica knew her father still kept track of news from the Witness Protection Program. She's doing well. Teaching environmental law at a small college in Oregon. Different name, different life, but apparently she's found some peace. Monica felt the familiar pang of loss mixed with relief. Part of her would always wonder what might have been if they'd met under different circumstances, but she'd learned to live with unanswered questions. I'm glad, she said, and meant it. Monica, can I ask you something? Sure. Do you ever regret it? Choosing family over love? Monica considered the question carefully. I didn't choose family over love, Dad. I chose truth over lies. Love built on deception isn't really love, it's just another form of manipulation. And now? Now I'm learning what real love looks like. Love that's honest about its flaws, love that chooses to stay even when things get difficult, love that builds something lasting instead of just feeling good in the moment. Richard smiled. Sounds like you're talking about more than just family love. Monica blushed slightly. Maybe. 6 months ago, she'd started dating Marcus Chen, the architect who designed their sustainable housing project. He was nothing like Diane, quiet where she'd been charismatic, steady where she'd been intense, honest where she'd been calculating. Their relationship was built on shared values and genuine compatibility rather than secrets and rebellion. He makes you happy, Richard observed. He makes me feel like myself. The best version of myself, but still me. That's what your mother did for me. Monica looked at the photograph on Richard's desk, the same photo that had survived the destruction of their old office. Her parents on their wedding day, young and hopeful and completely devoted to each other. Do you think she would have been proud of us? Eventually? I think she would have been proud of who we became after we stopped trying to be who we thought we should be. What would you do if you discovered that your greatest enemy was also your greatest teacher? Comment below and share your thoughts about second chances, family loyalty, and the power of truth. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows of the community center, casting warm light across the plans for their latest project. Monica and Richard worked side by side, father and daughter united by purpose and strengthened by everything they'd survived together. They'd lost an empire but gained something more valuable, a relationship built on honesty instead of control, trust instead of fear, partnership instead of competition. Outside, construction crews were preparing the ground for the new development. The wetlands would be preserved and integrated into the community design, creating a model for sustainable growth that honored both economic needs and environmental protection. You know what the best part is? Monica said, looking out at the construction site. What? We're not just building houses. We're building a legacy. Something that will outlast both of us, something that makes the world a little bit better. Your mother would have loved that. She would have loved us finally figuring out how to work together. Richard put his arm around his daughter's shoulders. She would have loved watching you become the woman you were meant to be. And she would have loved watching you become the father you were meant to be. They stood together in the warm afternoon light, looking out at the future they were building together. The Hale family name had been tested by betrayal and tempered by truth. Now it would be defined by the choices they made going forward, choices based on honesty, integrity, and the understanding that the strongest foundations are built on love that chooses to stay even when staying is difficult. If this story of family, betrayal, and redemption moved you, hit that like button. Subscribe for more stories that explore the complex bonds that both destroy and save us. Comment below, would you choose family or love if you could only save one? Remember, the strongest families aren't born perfect, they're forged in fire, shaped by truth, and strengthened by the decision to love each other despite their flaws.